Three readings from different parts of the Old Testament. Strange readings in some ways for a Good Friday. The first speaking of people and the first time they turned from God, eating what they were not to eat, disobeying the command that God had given them, and God's words into the situation, speaking to their enemy, the serpent, saying that one day a descendant that came from Eve would crush his head. At the same moment that he, the serpent, thought he had struck that descendant's heel and defeated him, there would be a moment when one of Eve's descendants would die, would be struck by his enemy. But in that death would be a great victory. The second from Psalm 22, speaking from the perspective of someone who is poured out, who is at the point of death, whose mouth is dry, who feels forsaken and alone. Words spoken into the history of Israel that would then be spoken from the cross. As Jesus himself said, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And asked for a drink because he was thirsty. And the final, perhaps the most famous, from Isaiah 53, where God, through the prophet Isaiah, speaks of the sin of the people. That all of us, that all people, like sheep, have wandered off, have gone astray. But that there would be someone on whom God would lay all of that, who would be pierced for our transgressions, crushed for our iniquities. God has been weaving through the story of his people these great promises, these great assurances that one day this would happen. And so we come in Mark 15 to these words. When it was noon, darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon. At 3 o'clock, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, "Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" When some of the bystanders heard it, they said, "Listen, he is calling for Elijah." And someone ran, filled with a sponge, with sour wine, put it on a stick, and gave it to him to drink, saying, "Wait, let us see whether Elijah will come to take him down." Then Jesus gave a loud cry and breathed his last. And the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. Now when the centurion who stood facing him saw that in this way he breathed his last, he said, "Truly this man was God's son." The God who had prepared his people for this moment bore this moment himself. The God who had planned this moment, who knew it was coming, and who had shared that with his followers, stepped in to take the cost. That it wasn't some other man, it wasn't some other person, it would be he himself. This was planned. This was purposed. In Revelation chapter 13, we read of the comfort of being in the Lamb's book of life, and John describes it in this way: the Lamb who was slain from the creation of the world. That in some sense, in the very act of creating the world, God was declaring that this would happen. That the Lamb was not just slain on Good Friday 2,000 years ago, but the intention and the purpose there was woven into the very fabric of creation. And so that leads me to the question, why? Why such a plan? Why would God choose to endure such pain? Not just as a rescue mission because it all went wrong, but why intend it? Why plan it? Why purpose it? If he knew that that was a consequence of creation, why go through with it? Why do it? Why would Father, Son, and Spirit, the Godhead in eternity past, plan for this? We know that God is love, and that those who live in love live in God. We know that God in his very nature is love. That Father, Son, and Spirit in their eternal relationship have a deep love within the Godhead and a deep love that wishes to overflow from the Godhead. And so love was built into the foundation of this world. The love of Father, Son, and Spirit, and the love that they desired for us to know of them and for us to demonstrate in return. But love is not love if it is not chosen. Love is not love if you have a gun to your head. Love is not love if it's under duress. For love to truly be woven into the fabric of this world, we must have the choice to love or not to love, to pursue, to honor, or to reject, to push away and refuse. So Father, Son, and Spirit, in their mutual free love of one another, we've freedom into our world. We've freedom of choice into our world. But freedom is not freedom if we can't go the other way. And freedom leads to failure, and failure means that there must be justice. Because Father, Son, and Spirit, in their eternal being, are just, are good, are right. And so the consequence of love is freedom, and the consequence of freedom is that justice must be done, and so a way is needed. A price must be paid. And that leads us back to the cross. That in the choice to weave love and freedom into this world, God had no other way. God had no other option but to leave the way open for us to reject him and for him to need to provide the way back. There was no other way to afford us the life that he's given us, the freedom and respect that he's paid us. And so it's true that the Lamb was slain at the foundation of the world, because from that very moment, it was always leading this way. It was always leading to that moment when the Son would be on the cross, forsaken by his Father, being punished for your wrongdoing and mine. It was always leading that way. This was not a hastily put together plan B because it all went unexpectedly wrong. This was always the only way. The only way to plan for love, for freedom, and for justice was for God to plan for pain and for sacrifice. So as Father, Son, and Spirit set in motion our world, they set in motion their plan. And it was always a plan that led down that road to the cross. And God knew that. And God pursued it anyway. He could have chosen not to. He could have chosen not us. But instead he chose us. And in choosing us, he chose the cross. The whole of history pointing to this moment. In the readings we've read already, in the life of Abraham as he looks to his own son and is asked to give him up. In the life of the people of Israel as they make sacrifice year after year after year, pointing forward to the great sacrifice that God would make. God had been preparing his people because it was always coming to this moment. There is great courage in someone who finds themselves, as people did this week in Paris, in the middle of a fire, and who chooses to look around to work out who they can save. There's perhaps even greater courage in someone who is a firefighter or a passerby who chooses to go into the flames in order to rescue those who are already in, putting themselves in harm's way. But imagine a scenario where someone is sat at home contemplating whether to sign up for the fire service or not. And someone comes along, and at this point we have to suspend our disbelief for a moment. But someone comes along to them and says, if you do this, there will be a time when you go into a burning building and you won't emerge, because you will lay down your life to save someone else. And that person still signs up. And that person still goes into that building. And that person still makes those choices. It's not an accident. It's not someone being courageous because it's been thrust upon them. It's someone making a choice. A choice to keep putting themselves in harm's way in order to rescue someone else. That's the cross. That's what Jesus is declaring as he dies for us. What utter love. What utter sacrifice. That the God who could have chosen not to do any of this chose to do it anyway. Knowing that he would bear the cost. Knowing that the very world that he had made, the very world that he had fashioned, would be used to kill his son. Malcolm Tyrrell, who's in our band this morning, earlier this year wrote a song. It's called The Splintered Cross. And I saw the words for it a couple of months ago. And I was struck, and this is what the chorus says of God. But it must have taken all your strength and will to sculpture Calvary's hill and plant the seed that would grow the splintered cross for your own beloved son. He made the very things that would be used to kill his son. He created the very people who would mock him, wrongly accuse him, and torture him. And why? Because it was the only way that he could give us true freedom and that we could love him truly. And that was worth it. To win our hearts, to win our souls, to win our lives and our love. It was worth it. He chose it. And he chose us. And if he has built such love at such cost into the foundation of this world, then the question I want us to think about is whether we will allow him to build that love, no matter where it leads, into the foundation of our hearts and our lives and our souls, and whether we will carry that to others.